Hi, and welcome once again to the second part of Being Emotionally Healthy. We continue our series on being human, and like last Sunday, we go again this week into talking about what it means to be human, but especially what it means to be an emotional human being. Just a quick recap of what we did last Sunday, which to just get us back, for those of you who have missed it, just getting us back to where we had left off. Last Sunday, we looked at what it meant to be emotionally human. We looked at what it meant to understand our emotions. It's a complicated world as we spoke about, but we want to look. We looked at what it meant to be emotionally and what it meant to understand these emotions. Today, we are going to be looking at how do we deal with those emotions. But a quick recap: if you remember last Sunday, we spoke about what it meant to look at our emotions as a gift from God. That in itself, emotions are not good or bad, but rather it is something that we receive as a gift from God. And we spoke about it having four purposes. These four purposes are to communicate to us what we truly love and value. Secondly, to connect deeply to others, to move us to action, and fourthly, to elevate us to worship God. As we keep these 4 points and purposes in mind, we move now to what it means to deal with these emotions. So how do you deal with these emotions? Before we talk about a healthy way of dealing with these emotions, we want to look at two ways in which these emotions can be dealt with in an unhealthy way. And these are common ways in which the world or culture or sometimes even we have dealt with in the past. And the two ways are, number one, and there are two extremes. So number one is that emotions are everything, where we give more importance to these emotions than they are due. It's based on the value we place, and often you see in culture around us, that emotions are everything, emotions are vital. It's so important for you to express what you feel, but to the extent of which it becomes almost like an idol in our life, and we allow it to rule over us. And in our churches, especially in charismatic churches, we do this often, where we evaluate the worship service based on how we felt, or we try and evaluate the word, the preaching, based on what it made us felt, or what it made us feel, or how we felt at the end of it, or what was the emotion that went to, and we evaluate whether it was a good sermon or a bad sermon, or a good worship service or not, based on that. In fact, you may wonder the fact that we are teaching two sermons on being emotional and what it means. It may seem like we are placing the similar value on emotions, but I want to really clarify one very important thing. It is the fact that even though understanding, identifying, and dealing with our emotions is a very important aspect, this is not the goal. This is dangerous because just because, like our mind and our flesh, even our emotions have been tainted and have been affected by sin. Colossians chapter 3 verses 5 says this very well. It says, and that means killing off everything connected with that way of death. Sexual promiscuity, impurity, lust, doing whatever you feel like whenever you feel like it, and grabbing whatever attracts your fancy. That's a life shaped by things and feelings instead of God. You see, it's the whole idea of just doing whatever we feel like, whenever we feel like. And we, as though we judge actions, and we judge situations based on how we feel. If we feel good, it's good, or if we feel bad, it's bad. But that's not always the case, because our whole bodies our emotions are also being affected by our sinful nature, because sometimes we feel like eating something unhealthy, and that's not good for us. Sometimes we feel like saying something to somebody that may not be helpful or may hurt somebody else. Sometimes we feel like doing something that we think, oh, it feels good, let's just go about doing it. But generally it may not be to the best of our interests and may harm us sometimes. So often, as you see, one extreme of dealing with emotions is where we consider emotions as being everything and we allow it to rule us. However, the other extreme is the whole aspect of where emotions are considered nothing. We addressed this last Sunday when we spoke about how culture and how sometimes we're used to dealing with emotions. And here this school of thoughts is that emotions require no importance. Ignore them, get over it, move on, move forward. Negative emotions are sinful. But as we addressed it last Sunday, we know that our God is an emotional God, and He feels, and He has created you and me in His image as emotional beings. So we are also meant to feel and deal with these feelings. And all feelings are not good or bad, but it's the action or the source from which it comes that could have moral implications. But in itself, feelings are not good or bad. And many times emotions allow us to communicate. Emotions communicate to us, as we saw in the purposes of emotions. They communicate to us things that maybe our minds and even our bodies can't do that effectively. That is the reason why God has given us these emotions. And so we need to see that emotions in itself at one end are not everything, they don't completely rule us, but at the same time we don't consider emotions nothing and put it to the other extreme where we completely ignore them. So what is the biblical way? What is the way in between that is a balanced biblical way of dealing with emotions? And in fact, in that book which I referred to last time, they use this word engage, where we don't ignore our emotions or we don't allow to rule them, but rather we look at them and we engage them. And how do we do that? And that's something that we're going to look at today. I'm going to give you 3 practical ways in which you and I can engage our emotions. The first thing that we do when it comes to engaging these emotions is, number 1, we identify them. We ask this question, what am I feeling? Now it seems obvious, but it's not so easy, because often we don't know what we are feeling at that particular point. We see that this is something that even Jesus did. Jesus identified and expressed his feelings to others. He said it in words by identifying it. You look at Matthew chapter 26, verses 37 to 38. This is in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's the day before Jesus is going to be crucified, and he is full of pain and sorrow and trouble to the extent of which he's even sweating blood, and he's so stressed and he's so troubled at this point. And these are the words that he says. He took Peter and 2 of the sons of Zebedee along with him and began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." You see, Jesus himself expresses his emotions. Even though he's feeling it, he sees a need to say it out to others, so that not only that, so for 2 reasons, and this is helpful for us. Number 1, it helps us understand and identify and start to understand what is it that we are feeling and why are we wanting to do the things that we want to do. But secondly, it also helps others understand. I don't know how often or how frustrated you may have gotten with somebody who is not willing to communicate what they're feeling. They're just sulking, they're upset, they're ignoring you in some way, but they are not able to communicate or say that to you. You say, if only they told me, what they are feeling, at least I would be able to understand. If they said, I'm feeling angry right now, I'm feeling upset, I'm sad, I'm feeling hurt, I'm scared. It just makes so much sense and gives so much context to understand, empathize and sympathize with the other person. When they just say, this is what I'm feeling right now, we know why they are ignoring. They're not ignoring us because they're upset with us or they're angry, but maybe something happened and they're fearful or they're anxious about something. Identifying it for yourself, and sometimes expressing that in words, not in uncontrolled actions. I'm talking about in clear, controlled words. Just by saying it is very helpful. Sometimes it's helpful when you stop and you identify, this is what I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling upset. It starts to make sense to you, and as you do this more, we start to see that it starts to help us to identify how do we need to react to certain emotions that we feel. In fact, even for kids, those of us who are parents here, it's a very useful exercise to help children identify their emotions. When they are feeling frustrated or angry or upset or sad or scared, teach them those words. What are you feeling right now? And it's such a better way of being able to express those emotions. Are saying, I'm feeling angry, I'm really, really frustrated, rather than going down on the floor and throwing a tantrum when they are much older. So it's always useful to help people and help our children and help us to identify that emotion first. What is it that we are feeling? It's a very useful practice to start off with. The second thing that helps us to engage with our emotions is the ability to examine that emotion. So first we identify. Second, we examine the emotion. The question we ask here is, why am I feeling this? We spoke about this last time, but even Philippians chapter 1 verses 9 to 10 says this in a very helpful way. Paul says this, he says, "So this is my prayer, that your love will flourish and that you will not only love much but love well. Learn to love appropriately. You need to use your head and test your feelings so that your love is sincere and intelligent, not sentimental gush." It's very helpful here that Paul is not trying to separate and give us a choice between head and heart, but he's helping us to collaborate both of them, head and heart coming together to be able to express clearly what God has done for us and how he has made us. So using our minds, using our spirits instead to test and examine these emotions is a very helpful practice. Examining our emotions is not any different from examining our bodies. We are in a time of a pandemic, and there's a lot of fear over people falling sick. Not many people are saying that they're falling sick. They're doing all that they can. But generally, even if someone got a fever, you're not going to immediately take them and admit them into the ICU. Whenever we get a fever or we feel sick, our body tells us that you're feeling sick and your body starts to heat up. You start to examine that. Why is that? Is it because it's an infection in my stomach? Is it a viral? Is it a bacterial infection? Is it an allergic reaction? Sometimes even for our children, is it due to a vaccination that was given? Is it a good reason? Is this expected? We don't rush, and we wait sometimes for a few days. So often we find examining our body and our reactions to our body a helpful ways in which we can react to the signs that it's giving us. In the same way, even with our emotions, we need to sometimes stop and examine what exactly we are feeling before we take that step to act it out. And this connects to what we spoke of last time. What is the purpose of our emotions? And as I said, that our emotions help us to understand what we truly value and what we communicate. So the aspect of examining our emotions, as Paul speaks about the whole idea of using our head to test our feelings, it tells us to stop and ask these questions. Why am I feeling this way? What is this communicating to me? What am I valuing or what am I feeling? Why am I reacting to this so much? What about this is affecting me so much? Is this a recurring pattern? Is it due to a past event, or is it because something that happened in my childhood? Is it related to the current situation, or am I reacting to something that happened before? And so constantly it's important for us to examine these feelings. Sometimes being able to discuss it with a friend is helpful, because sometimes we may not be able to do it ourselves. Talking to somebody else, someone who you're not upset with or not angry with, you're not anxious about, you can talk to them and say, this is what I am feeling. Last Sunday, as we had our Zoom meeting after the service, we spoke about something to do with this in this regard in our discussions, and we spoke about what is it that our emotions are communicating to us. And I remember sharing the story of how every time I am due to travel, whether by plane or by train or moving out of the city, or I'm traveling somewhere, from that morning, from traveling in the evening, from the morning onwards, I start to feel very jittery. I start to feel very on edge. I start to feel very nervous and anxious. I get these weird feelings in my stomach as I'm going to travel. If it's the next day, then from the night onwards it starts. I can't sleep, and I start to feel, and it's a recurring pattern that every time I'm traveling, I start to feel these very weird feelings. And it's important for me to constantly ask, and as I reflected on those feelings, I realized that it's communicating to me how much I value safety, how much I value being safe, how much I value being connected with the familiar and not wanting to take risks or not wanting to take adventure. But it also reminds me of times and an occasion when I left home once and left Joel and Priyanka, and that time Anaya, none of the other kids were born. It was just Joel. He was just over a year old. And how I left them early because they were going to fly down the next day, and I went by train. And I remember that time when midway through the train journey, I got a call from Priyanka's dad saying that Joel has been admitted into hospital. It's the first time he had febrile seizures. And it was a very scary moment for me. I remember I said, I wish I didn't leave them alone. I wish I didn't leave them alone. I should have traveled with them. And so every time I travel, I start to have this fear, thinking that something may go wrong, something may be, and it shows how I need to really learn to trust God more. Because what generally happens is I start to act out, I start to be more edgy, I start to get more irritated with the family before I leave. But as I reflect on this, I realize it's a problem that I have. It's something within me. It's my own lack of trust in God, and I need to really grow and allow and really learn to trust God that He is in control of these situations. And so another aspect of examining our feelings is the whole idea of even asking this question, where is this coming from? And that helps us to evaluate, why am I feeling this way? And is this feeling supposed to lead to a good action or a bad action? For example, often, as we spoke of last Sunday, that these feelings communicate to us what we love, what we value, but they also help us to connect with God, help us to be moved by what He wants to be moved, help us to love what He loves. And He speaks to us through our emotions and helps us respond to situations through our emotions in ways that He wants us to do. So often these feelings may come from God. These a sense of anger when we see or read a story of a child being raped, a sense of anger when we see injustice happening, a sense of joy when we see someone rejoicing or something good happening to someone. But sometimes we also realize that we may feel a sense of joy at the cost of someone feeling hurt when we know this person didn't get the promotion they were supposed to get to, which I was supposed to get, and they didn't get it, and there's a sense of joy and happiness. So we realize as we looked at where is this coming from, because sometimes these feelings come from our own selfish ambitions. They come from the pressure that the world puts on us, a sense of anxiety and the expectation that the world puts on us, and we are so connected and there's so much of pressure that's associated with it. And sometimes it even comes from the devil himself, demonic forces that are tormenting us, just like we saw in the Old Testament in 1 Samuel chapter 16 verses 14. I won't read it, but we know it's a story of how Saul was being tormented by an evil spirit, and he calls David to play the harp for him so that he can be at peace during this time. And so we realize that sometimes these emotions don't come from good places, but they may come from bad places. And so it's helpful for us to start to identify, where is this coming from? Why am I feeling this way? Before we jump into doing and acting out those emotions. So this is a helpful way of growing in emotional maturity, where we are able to stop and examine what we are feeling. So what am I feeling? Identify. Why am I feeling this? Examine those feelings. And finally, we want to act. The third step is to act. How should I respond? We spoke about this again, that our emotions are there to communicate to us and to help us to move into action. They cause us to want to do something, whether it's a sense of anger, whether it's a sense of joy, anxiety, a sense of fear. It always causes us to want to do something. And so it moves us to action. But often all emotions don't necessarily lead us to good actions. And all positive emotions may not lead us to good actions. All negative emotions may not lead us to bad actions. So it's always helpful to stop. I remember having a discussion with my friend Jacob, and he's even released a podcast, which I can put the link down at the end of this video, and you can have a look here at this podcast where we spoke about how, and referring to this whole situation of how the injustice that was done to Jairaj and Benix and the injustice that was done to them, and what the people felt in response. So the injustice, the anger was justified, but that anger was expressed in multiple ways. In some way it helped people to discuss and to make people aware of what was happening, and bring a spotlight to the injustice and the structure in the system. But that anger also led people to do damage to property, to hurt others, to blame every single police officer, whether they did it or not, And so sometimes these angers can lead us to good actions, and sometimes they may lead us to actions that are not justified or bad actions. And so often we have to learn how to separate the emotion from the action. And this is a very biblical idea. In fact, in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 26, Paul says, "In your anger, do not sin." So in one sense, he is acknowledging and accepting and identifying the fact that we may feel angry, but it's not necessary that just because you feel angry, you have an excuse or the right to sin. And so often after we examine the emotion, we need to act accordingly. Is this an issue that's related to me alone? Should I deal with it with an action by myself? Do I need to resolve something in me? Do I need to deal it within me? Or do I need to address appropriately to somebody else in the right way? So separating the emotion from the action is a very biblical idea, and we realize that as we do that, we're able to express and be able to positively use the channel or the spotlight of these emotions in our lives to bring forward what God has a purpose for them, as we identify, as we examine, and as we act out those emotions in a way that is not sinful. And so you see, these 3 steps are very helpful to dealing with emotions. However, as you and I know this very clearly, you may know this as well, that often at the point of when we feel that sense of anger or anxiety or fear, we sometimes lose our minds. We can't think straight. It's very difficult to stop at that point and start to identify, examine, and act out in an appropriate way. It's not possible to do that, especially because of the way in which the emotion overwhelms us. And so it's very important, and luckily and fortunately, and this is such a big encouragement for us, the Bible provides an answer to this. And the answer is this: the fact that if our emotions have been given to us by God, is a gift to us by God, who better to help us understand to deal with these emotions, especially when they are out of our control and out of our depth, than to bring it back to God Himself. And so our emotions, especially at that point, and God, the amazing thing about who our God is and who Christ is and what God has done for us, and this is the gospel of grace and the good news of Jesus, the fact that no matter how we feel or who we are and what we are feeling, we can take those emotions as they are and bring it before God. Not towards a person, because you may hurt them, and it's not expected to just thrash a person with the anger you're feeling or the anxiety or burden somebody else. But Jesus says, all of you who are tired, come to me, bring your anxieties, cast your burdens upon Him, as Peter says in his letter as well. And so God calls us, and the book of Psalms, if you don't believe me, if you don't think that we can be free with our emotions and just say it as it is before God, the book of Psalms, which is the largest book in the Bible, is all about this. It's all about people expressing their fears, their anger, their joy, their anxiety, their pain, their suffering, whatever feeling it may be, their love, their sense of peace. They're just expressing it and pouring it out to God. And so it's a very biblical idea. It's a very God idea. It's a very God processed and God encouraged idea to pour out our emotions to God. In fact, Psalm 62 verse 8 says this: trust in Him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to Him, for God is our refuge. God can handle it, whatever you are feeling. Let me assure you this, that whatever you are feeling, whatever intensity, whatever pain, whatever the level of intensity you're feeling this emotion, our God can handle it. And He encourages you and He encourages me to take those emotions and bring it to Him. He calls us to bring those emotions to Him. Let me read another psalm for you, and this is an amazing psalm. Psalm 25 verses 16 says onward, says, turn to me. This is a psalmist crying out in prayer with all the emotions to God. Turn to me and have mercy, for I am alone and in deep distress. My problems go from bad to worse. Oh, save me from them all. Feel my pain and see my trouble. Forgive all my sins. See how many enemies I have and how viciously they hate me. Protect me, rescue me, my life from them. Do not let me be disgraced, for in you I take refuge. May integrity and honesty protect me, for I put my hope in you. You see the honesty in this? Is he worried what God will think of him? No. He is not worried, because God understands the very gift that He's given us. If you give your gift, a gift to your child, or you give a gift to your friend, and you see them misusing it, or you see them not able, wouldn't you want to help them? And God calls out to us. He says, wouldn't you want to say, this is how you can use it? And so we have full capacity to come before God and bring our emotions to Him. Sometimes we ourselves don't know and don't understand, because we are so deeply pained, and some of our emotions just overrule us and take over us. And so even at those times, God calls us through His Spirit to call out to Him in prayer, to ask Him to come and help. And in Romans chapter 8 verse 26, it says that in the same way the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. He who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance to the will of God. So you see here the amazing truth in the fact that how God is for us. And as you feel this, as you're struggling with a sense of anger or anxiety at this point in your life, and remember that, and you don't know what to do about it, the Spirit of God is here to comfort us. He is called the Comforter for a reason. He is the one who reminds us of the truth of God. And He comes and He intercedes and takes us on and carries us on because at the end of the day, this is what has been given to us by God, and God can help us to handle the thing that He has given us. And God will never look down upon us. Matthew chapter 12 verse 20, which is a familiar verse for some of us, is quoting an Old Testament prophet. It says, "A brood reed He will not break, and a smouldering wick He will not snuff out." But I love the way the Message translates this verse, and it really helps us and really shows us what the heart of God is when it comes to emotions. He says, He won't walk over anyone's feelings, won't push you into a corner. Often we are scared to express our emotions to others and tell others, I'm upset or I'm angry, because it makes us vulnerable. They can take advantage of us if they know what we are feeling. But God never does that. God never takes advantage of us. He never puts us down for feeling in a particular way. He does not snub us. He does not destroy us. He does not break us. He does not snuff us out. But rather, He does not push us into a corner. He loves us. He accepts us, He understands us, and He takes us on, and He helps us change and channel those very emotions that He has given us to be human, to feel what He feels, to love what He loves, to hate what He hates, and change those emotions into what He wants to use that for in this world. So we can come before God. And Jesus Himself understands this. He understands the aspect because He is human and He is in you and me. He identifies these feelings, the pain and the struggles that you and I may be feeling, the feeling of desire, ungodly desire, the feeling of anger, the feeling of all of these things that may come within us, but not necessarily as they are temptations that come. And Jesus feels that. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 to 16, it says, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet He did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." Jesus is the example to follow, but He's also the enabler. He also enables us. He strengthens us, and He knows. He says this to you. I know what you're feeling. I know how angry you are feeling. I know how hurt you are feeling. I know how anxious you are because of what has happened, what is happening in the world. I know that. But yet I call you to bring those feelings to me and let me deal with those feelings with you, for you. I'm not against you, I am for you. I will not snuff you out. I will not corner you. I will not make fun of you for the feelings that you're feeling. I will not look down on you, but I will accept it. You come to me. If you can't handle them, bring them to me, is what Jesus says to each one of us. And more than that, what I find even more amazing about what Jesus did is the fact that as He shared His emotions in Gethsemane with His Father, He also shares them with His friends. And I find that absolutely amazing. The King of Kings, the Son of God, the Creator of heaven and earth, who ascended here, He found it important to go and share with His close friends what He's feeling like, even the negative emotions, the pain, the struggle that He was feeling, the deep sorrow and the trouble that He was feeling. He brings that to His friends, and that is the reason why God has made us part of a community. As we develop friends in this community, feel free in our church to call up people, not just the elders, not just the home circle leaders, people who you are comfortable with, who you can develop a relationship with, and just share with them, this is what I'm feeling. I'm really struggling with anxiety. I'm really struggling with anger. I'm really struggling with a sense of an ungodly desire or a sense of lust that is constantly coming over me, that wanting me to do things I don't want to do. I'm feeling this way. I'm feeling a great sense of disgust, or I'm feeling very rejected. Bringing those feelings and telling people is what Jesus did. Jesus did this with His friends, even though they were he was perfect, he could handle it, but yet he chose to be vulnerable and open to his friends. So find a trusted friend, find somebody who you can build a relationship with, and so that they and you together can pray through this. Philippians chapter 4 verses 6 to 7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." I was reading this book, and there it said, anxiety is wasted prayer. As anxiety is actually a sense of feeling for you and for me that, we are not able to handle certain situations. It's difficult for us. We are not God. God is God. And anxiety reminds us of that. What an amazing privilege that we have to remind us that anxiety is an emotion that causes us to lead us to prayer. Don't give in to it. And it says, do not be anxious. So when that anxious feeling starts to come and you start, it's a response for us to take that and bring it to prayer to God. Don't let it be wasted. Don't let it be wasted on anxiety. But take that and bring it to prayer to God. Over this last week, I have really been struggling with one of my deepest fears coming true. I don't know if some of you are aware, but I had a severe damage to my wrist, to my tendon over here, which had taken place somewhere last year. And it was getting really worse. And I couldn't type, I couldn't use this hand, the strength was gone. And I really prayed and asked God to bring healing to it. And over a period of time, as I tried to treat it, finally, at the beginning of this year, I took a steroid injection and it started to heal. And I suddenly found that right through the lockdown, my hand was getting much better. It was as though nothing had, it was slightly hurt, but I was able to use it and able to do things quite normally with this hand once again. And I always feared that I hope it doesn't come back. I really hoped it didn't come back, especially as I start my PhD. I know I have to do a lot of typing and a lot of writing, and there was always this fear of it not coming back. But it had really gotten better, and I thought it was completely healed. But over the last couple of weeks, as I started work again, I started typing again, started to do things use this hand in a normal way, and it came back. And my biggest fear, and as I got up every morning feeling that same sort of pain like I did when months ago, I started getting really anxious. I really started getting trouble. I said, oh God, not now. I'm going to start my writing now. I don't want this. You know how much you've called me to do this. You know my work is, I need to get these, there's going to be a lot of typing to be done, and I can't afford to have an anxious hand and a painful wrist and being unable to type right now. And at that point, as I was there and I was starting to get anxious, I got a WhatsApp forward, God spoke to me through, and it was this very verse, don't be anxious, but in everything through prayer and petition, give your request to God, and He will give you the peace. And that verse gave me a great sense of using that anxious emotions and bringing it back to God. And say, God, I'm really anxious about this. I'm really struggling. Honestly, my hand is not healed. But all I know is that God has given me a peace that's beyond my understanding. I know that I'm starting to understand that even if it's starting to hurt, and as I'm starting to treat it, I know that God is in control. To remind me that the journey that's there up ahead and what's going to come is not just dependent on me or my ability to type or my ability to think, but it's something that God is going to take me through. And somehow this handicap is reminding me that God is in control. And it's leading me to worship Him and call out to Him, and that sense of peace of reminding me, even as my hand pains, I know, God, you are in control. I know that you will take me through this time, even as I find it so difficult. Emotions are a gift from God. They help us communicate what we love and what we value. They elevate us to worship God. Jesus Himself felt it. The Spirit leads us and uses that. And Jesus understands what you and I are feeling, especially in this pandemic. A sense of grief, a sense of real anxiety of what is happening in our city right now. As I record the sermon, the cases are skyrocketing. They're increasing exponentially. And there's a great sense of fear and anxiety that is coming over us. But let that feeling be used by you and me to call out to our God and say, God, come and intervene. Let's turn that into prayer. That song, that old hymn says, are you weary and tired? That's because all we need to do is take it to the Lord in prayer. take it to the Lord in prayer. And let's do that as we end this time. As I pray for us, let's remind ourselves every time a sense of emotion that comes, and even as we identify, examine, and act. As we grow in emotional maturity, but remember that God is always there, wanting to hear what is it that those emotions are very dead. He calls us to come to Him and pour out our hearts to Him and change these emotions, to take that energy that the emotions put within us and turn it to prayer and call out to our God. Let's just pray now. Father, I thank you for the gift of these emotions you give us. Lord, please forgive us that many times we use it, we misuse it for ungodly gain, or for us, or for excuses, or to sin. But thank you, Lord, that you've shown us how through your word that we can separate our actions from our emotions. Thank you, Lord, that through our emotions we can connect with others and we can connect with you deeply. Help, and we commit our emotions into your hands. And Lord, we cry out to you for our city. We cry out to you for our nation. Lord, come and intervene and let all the fear and the anxiety that is there as we grapple with it, remind us that you are God in control. This is beyond our control. This is beyond what we can do, but you are in control. Thank you, Lord. We ask you this in Jesus' name. Amen.